March 14th, 2026. Mars isn't sending you a message. It's doing something more confronting than that. It's exposing what you've been avoiding. This is the type of timing that doesn't force outcomes, but it forces clarity, especially about where you've been postponing your own life. The excuses that sounded reasonable start sounding repetitive. The delays that felt safe start feeling expensive. And the next step you've been overthinking starts looking simple. One move forward, even if it's small, even if it's private, even if nobody claps. Mars is a visible planet, and its position can be checked on sky charts and ephemeris tables. The North Node is not a planet, and not a glowing object sitting next to Mars. It's a geometric point. In astronomy, a node is where an orbit crosses the ecliptic plane, the apparent path the sun follows across the sky. For the moon, those nodes matter because eclipses are only possible when the moon is at or near one of them. That is geometry, not drama. The symbolic layer comes from astrology, which treats the North Node like a directional pull and uses it as a language for growth and timing. If you keep that distinction clear, the rest of the message becomes stronger, calmer, and more believable. Because the title names March 14th, it also helps to think in terms of a short window rather than one single instant. In some systems, the closest alignment between Mars and the North Node can land late on March 13th in one time zone and into March 14th in another, depending on the reference used and whether someone tracks the mean node or true node. That doesn't weaken the idea, it cleans it up. The sky is precise, but the way humans label the moment is local. When you treat it as a window, you avoid fragile claims, and you still respect the core feeling people have around this date, the sense that direction is becoming harder to ignore. Mars itself gives you solid anchors that don't rely on belief. Around mid-March 2026, commonly used sky tracking S place Mars in the constellation Aquarius. One computed snapshot for March 13th, 2026 lists Mars in Aquarius, with an apparent magnitude around 1.18 and a distance around 2.32 astronomical units. You don't need to overuse numbers, but one or two details like this change the texture of your voice. It sounds like you actually looked at the sky instead of inventing a mood. It also reminds the listener that this isn't a metaphor floating in space. Mars is there, moving, measurable, consistent, indifferent to our opinions. Motion becomes even more real when you mention coordinates, because coordinates don't flatter anyone. At 0000 UTC on March 13th, 2026, one ephemeris table lists Mars at right ascension, 22 hours, 41 minutes, 1.94 seconds, and declination minus 9 degrees 30 minutes, 19.5 seconds. At 0000 UTC on March 14th, it shifts to 22 hours, 43 minutes, 59.31 seconds, and declination minus 9 degrees, 12 minutes, 31.6 seconds. That drift is subtle, but it carries a quiet message that mirrors this entire theme. Nothing stays still. Even if your life feels paused, even if your mind feels trapped in a loop, the sky keeps moving. And when people say a date activates something, what they often mean is that the mind finally catches up to the truth that movement is already happening. Location matters too, and acknowledging it makes you sound human rather than theatrical. A sky guide might say, Mars is not observable from a specific city at a specific time because it reaches its highest point during daylight there. That doesn't mean Mars disappears. It means geometry meets latitude, and not every place gets the same view at the same hour. If someone wants to spot Mars, the simplest advice is to check a sky map for their city and find the best viewing time from their location. The meaning of this window doesn't depend on whether someone gets a perfect view anyway. What matters is what this date tends to bring up inside a person, especially when they already feel like they're standing at the edge of a next step. March 2026 also has a wider backdrop that makes this period feel louder. NASA's Skywatching Guide highlights a total lunar eclipse, blood moon, on March 3rd, a Venus plus Saturn conjunction on March 8th, and the vernal equinox on March 20th. Those are clean, mainstream markers. When a month contains big turning points, like an eclipse and an equinox, people naturally get reflective, even if they don't think they do. They start noticing patterns. They feel endings and beginnings more strongly. They become less tolerant of stagnation. So when March 14th arrives inside the same month, the internal pressure can feel amplified, not because the sky is threatening anyone, but because the mind is already primed to notice change. Time and Date's March 2026 overview also notes the March 2nd to 3rd total lunar eclipse and places the March equinox on March 20th at 1446 UTC. Details like this keep your voice grounded. They give you permission to speak with calm certainty, because you're standing on a real calendar of sky events, rather than trying to convince people with exaggeration. The more grounded you are, the less you need to perform. And the more your viewer feels like they can trust your tone, the more they'll stay with you through the deeper, more personal part of this message. Now comes the part that people actually feel. Mars, symbolically, is drive, heat, courage, friction, impulse, and forward motion. It's the energy that stops negotiating and starts acting. The North Node, symbolically, is treated like a forward pull, an unfamiliar road, a growth edge that doesn't come with immediate certainty. When people describe Mars near the North Node, the simplest translation is motion meeting direction. The internal effect can feel like a rising intolerance for your own delays. The things you've been postponing begin to feel heavier than the effort it would take to begin. The excuses that once sounded logical start sounding repetitive. The comfort of staying in a familiar pattern starts feeling expensive. This doesn't land the same way for everyone, which is why this kind of message can feel personal. For some people, it hits identity. Not identity as a label, but identity as behavior. The version of you that stays agreeable, stays small, stays easy to accept, stays quietly edited so you don't become a problem. Under a window like this, self-editing can become exhausting. The mask starts feeling heavy. Approval stops feeling worth the cost. You might notice yourself explaining less, apologizing less, shrinking less, not because you suddenly became cold, but because you're tired of abandoning yourself in small ways for the comfort of being liked. In other people, it lands on independence in the most practical sense: time, energy, boundaries, ownership, and the right to build a life that actually belongs to you. The first sign isn't always bravery. Sometimes it's irritation, clean irritation. You start noticing what drains you. You notice the environments that keep you stuck. You notice which relationships are built on obligation instead of mutual respect. You notice how often you postpone your own life to keep other people comfortable. And once you notice that, it becomes harder to keep pretending it's normal. A quiet line starts forming inside you. This is not permanent, and you know it. For a third group, it hits the body. Sleep matters more. Overstimulation becomes harder to tolerate. Discipline looks less like punishment and more like protection. The body often becomes the first place that refuses the old rhythm, because the body can't keep acting like everything is fine when it isn't. This is where people start craving routines that calm the nervous system. Less chaos, fewer late nights that steal energy, fewer habits that numb, more movement that clears the mind. It can look simple from the outside, but it's a serious internal shift. The body stops cooperating with the old excuses. The moment these areas wake up, something else usually follows: subtraction. People often call it sacrifice, but real sacrifice is rarely dramatic destruction. It's psychological subtraction. It's what you stop feeding. The most common thing that gets dropped in a window like this is a story. The story that explains why movement has been delayed. Sometimes that story has been true. Sometimes it was valid in an earlier chapter. But validity doesn't guarantee permanence. A reason can be real and still become outdated. When that outdated reason keeps running your life, it turns into a quiet cage. Familiarity is one of the strongest cages there is. The mind prefers known discomfort to unknown growth. Familiar pain feels manageable. New territory feels risky. This is survival wiring, not weakness. The issue is that survival wiring becomes a prison when your life has outgrown it. That's why March 14th can feel sharp. It doesn't demand that you destroy your life. It demands that you stop pretending you don't see what you already see. It pressures the mind to admit the truth. Staying still has become a choice, not a condition. This is where your relationship with time begins to change, and it's one of the most powerful psychological effects people report during directional windows. Normally, the future sits far away. It feels like a distant room you'll enter when you're ready, when life calms down, when you know more, when you stop being afraid. People store their real desires in the distance because distance feels safe. Distance lets you admire the dream without risking embarrassment. When momentum builds, the distance collapses. The goal stops feeling like fantasy and starts feeling like a path. The mind stops obsessing over the finish line and begins noticing the first step. That shift can be uncomfortable because it removes a common hiding place: imagination without action. Imagination is powerful, but it can also become storage for a life you keep postponing. Under a window like this, the internal question changes. It becomes less about whether you can do the thing and more about what the first move looks like. Once the first move becomes visible, staying still stops feeling neutral. It starts feeling like a decision. That is why these dates can feel intense without any external drama. The intensity isn't in the sky. The intensity is in the honesty that finally arrives. Another pattern that tends to show up when direction gets louder is how ordinary catalysts become. Turning points rarely arrive as fireworks. They arrive through sentences. A passing comment that stays in your mind. A conversation that feels normal until you replay it later. An unexpected idea that lands at the exact right time. Most of the time, it doesn't feel spiritual in the moment. It feels like Tuesday. But later you realize it was a pivot. That is how life changes direction for most people. Not through cosmic thunder, but through a human encounter that opens a door you didn't know existed. The safest way to handle that is not to hunt for signs. It's to notice relevance. The mind doesn't cling to irrelevant information. It clings to what matters for your next step. If one idea keeps returning, if one sentence keeps echoing, if one truth keeps resurfacing, that's not because secret codes are being sent to you. It's because your psyche recognizes what your ego keeps trying to delay. Paying attention to that is not superstition. It's self-respect. It's the willingness to listen to your own pattern recognition. This is where it helps to bring the message down into something practical, because practical integration keeps the whole experience from becoming theatrical. A simple 10-minute process is enough. Write one sentence that tells the truth about what is stalled, bluntly, without poetry. Write one sentence about what you control in the next 3 days. Not the outcome, the move. Write one sentence about the boundary you have been avoiding, because boundaries reveal where you've been trading your future for short-term comfort. Write one sentence about the smallest action that proves you are serious. Small action, not dramatic action. Then stop. Don't build a perfect plan. Don't create 100 steps. Don't turn honesty into homework. One real step is enough to change how the future feels, because movement changes perception. Now let's add one more night sky detail for March 14th that is not astrology at all. And including it gives your message a clean, verifiable texture. The Gamma Nor Mid meteor shower is active from February 25th to March 28th, and in the sky notes, it produces peak activity around March 14th. The page also gives a nominal peak rate, around 6 meteors per hour under ideal conditions, and explains something important. How many you actually see depends heavily on where you are, because the radiance altitude matters. It also notes the peak is close to new moon, meaning moonlight interference is minimal. This is the kind of detail that makes your night sky framing feel real without turning the whole video into a science lecture. It also gives you a clean metaphor that doesn't require you to invent anything. Meteors are brief. You cannot force them. You prepare by choosing darkness, patience, and a wider gaze. If the sky gives you a streak, it becomes a reminder that something can be real even if it's short. That mirrors the way internal turning points often arrive. They can be a brief moment of honesty that changes everything. A quiet admission, a private decision, a boundary finally acknowledged, a move you stop postponing. Those moments can look small, but they change direction, and direction is what most people are actually craving. A mature warning belongs here, because it keeps the message safe and grounded. Momentum is not the same as chaos. Courage is not the same as adrenaline. Some people feel activated and immediately try to prove change by doing something drastic, blowing up relationships, quitting without thinking, starting fights, announcing a new identity overnight. That is not transformation. That is intensity trying to impersonate growth. Real growth is quieter. Real growth is consistent. Real growth can be private. If a big impulse hits, give it enough space for your nervous system to settle. If the direction still feels right after intensity drops, it is more likely to be aligned. That one practice protects you from self-sabotage while still honoring the message of this window. Move forward, but move intelligently. Pulling back to Mars again keeps everything cohesive. Mars is listed in Aquarius around mid-March 2026 in S. That track its constellation, magnitude, and distance. Its right ascension and declination shift from March 13th to March 14th, demonstrating real motion. Visibility depends on location, and that's normal. The point of grounding the sky like this is not to impress anyone with data. It's to make the message trustworthy. The sky is doing something real, and people are attaching meaning to it in a way that often helps them admit what they have been avoiding. Nodes also have a clean, verifiable place in the conversation because they matter in eclipse mechanics. NASA's eclipse res explained that the moon's orbit is tilted by about 5.145 degrees, and that the intersection points where the moon's path crosses the ecliptic are the ascending and descending nodes. This is why eclipses are tied to nodes in a literal way. When you include that, you give the listener a bridge between science and symbolism. You're not asking them to believe blindly. You're showing them that even the direction point language is built on something real, geometry and alignment. Now, this is where the title lands best, and it lands best when it's delivered as truth, not as threat. You are not ready for what's happening, not because it's dangerous, but because it's honest. Not ready to keep calling avoidance timing. Not ready to keep calling fear being realistic. Not ready to keep shrinking your life into a shape that other people can handle. Not ready to keep postponing the version of you that you secretly respect. That is why this window can feel intense. It removes the comfort of pretending. It makes the present feel temporary. It makes the next step feel visible. Once a step is visible, staying still stops feeling neutral. So, keep it simple around March 14th, 2026. Name what has been stalled. Name the excuse that has been protecting it. Choose one small move that proves you are serious. Let the result be quiet. Let it be private. Let it be real. If you step outside and watch the sky, do it with realistic expectations. If the gamma normids are visible from where you live, you may catch a few meteors. If they are not, perspective is still there. The reminder that motion continues even when your life has felt paused. March 2026 is already marked by real sky milestones, like the total lunar eclipse and the equinox. Use the clarity of that season gently and responsibly. Keep your moves small enough to be sustainable and real enough to change direction, because direction is what changes everything. When a window like this passes, people often expect an immediate external result, as if the sky owes them proof. Most of the time, the first change is quieter than that. It shows up as a cleaner mood, a sharper instinct, a lower tolerance for what drains you, and a stronger preference for choices that actually respect your future. The shift can feel small in the moment, but small doesn't mean weak. Small is often the only way change becomes sustainable. If you notice yourself thinking more clearly, speaking more directly, or protecting your energy without guilt, don't rush to label it. Let it settle. Let it become normal. A lot of people lose momentum because they treat clarity like a temporary feeling instead of a new standard. If you want to seal this period in a practical way, pick one action that is simple enough to repeat. Not a dramatic announcement, not a life overhaul, just one move that proves consistency. A boundary you stop negotiating, a routine you protect, a message you send, a habit you drop. Keep it private if you need to. Growth does not require an audience to be real. In fact, the most powerful shifts often happen without anyone noticing until your life starts looking different because your decisions are different. That is how direction changes. Quietly at first, then permanently. Carry this date like a reminder, not like a superstition. The sky moves on, and so should you, with calm confidence and a steady mind.